What would you do if the richest woman in your city suddenly knelt in front of your broken wheelchair and whispered, "I ruined your life before it even began"? Most people would assume madness, a cruel joke. Tyler Bennett did too, until the cold weight of a bronze key changed everything. The smell of scorched fuel and decaying trash wrapped around Tyler as he pushed the warped wheels forward. The metal groaned in protest, screaming louder than the traffic that never cared to slow down for him. Sweat soaked his torn shirt, the midday heat pressing against his spine like a hand that refused to let go. Hunger clawed at his stomach, sharp and familiar, triggered by the distant scent of grilled meat drifting from a street cart he could never afford. The plaza was alive. Businessmen brushed past without seeing him. Children laughed, chasing birds across cracked stone. Vendors shouted promises of food and comfort Tyler had long stopped believing in. He positioned himself in his usual corner near a splintered bench, lifted his shaking hand, and waited. Coins dropped one by one into a dented can, not charity, routine. Survival reduced to sound. That's when she appeared. She moved slowly, like time itself bent around her, white hair pinned carelessly. A faded dark dress clinging to a body worn thin by decades, but her eyes, sharp, piercing, impossibly aware, locked onto Tyler with a focus that made his chest tighten. She stopped directly in front of him. "You're Tyler," she said. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness. Tyler Bennett. The world tilted. No one knew his full name. He was invisible by design. "You're mistaken," he muttered, though his hands had already begun to shake. She wasn't listening. "I don't have much time," she coughed, the sound wet and alarming. "Maybe an hour, maybe less, but I had to find you first." Before Tyler could pull away, her cold fingers brushed his cheek. He flinched. People didn't touch him. Not like that, not with recognition. From her cracked leather purse, she produced a bronze key tied with a faded red cord. It looked ancient, heavy, final. 47 Sunflower Lane, she said. "Go today. Everything you need to know is waiting there." Tyler stared at the key as if it might bite him. "Why me?" Tears pooled in her eyes. "Because 32 years ago I made a choice," she whispered. "And that choice destroyed your life." She pressed the key into his palm. It was freezing, unnaturally so. "When you open that door," she said softly, stepping back, "you'll finally understand why you were abandoned and why the truth hurts more than poverty ever did." Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Tyler sat frozen, the key burning in his hand, a single thought pounding through his skull. How could a stranger know everything he never spoke aloud? The key felt heavier with every second that passed, as if it carried more than metal, like it was dragging buried years behind it. Tyler stared at his palm, half expecting the object to vanish, to prove the woman had been nothing more than a heat-induced hallucination. But it stayed. Solid, real, accusing. 47 Sunflower Lane, he knew that street. Everyone in the city did. Once a symbol of wealth, now a graveyard of decaying mansions and forgotten names. The kind of place children dared each other to approach and adults avoided without admitting why. It was miles away, far beyond the comfort of familiar begging corners and predictable routines. Tyler swallowed and tucked the coin can into the side pouch of his chair. He began to push. Each turn of the wheels sent fire through his palms. The metal scraped against concrete, loud and ugly, forcing pedestrians to step aside in irritation. He didn't apologize, he never did. Apologies didn't move you forward. Arms straining, breath shallow, he crossed intersections where cars honked and cyclists cursed. A dog barked at his wheels like they were an enemy invading its territory. Block after block, the city changed its face. Shops gave way to boarded windows. Clean sidewalks crumbled into uneven slabs that rattled his chair violently. His hands reopened old wounds, blood mixing with dust, but he refused to stop. Stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant fear. By the time he reached Sunflower Lane, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. The street was silent, too silent. Overgrown hedges swallowed iron gates. Houses leaned inward like tired giants whispering secrets to one another. Number 47 waited at the end. The mansion was larger than Tyler imagined, stone walls wrapped in ivy, windows dark and watchful. A rusted gate groaned open at his touch. The path beyond was a nightmare of uneven stones, completely impassable by chair. Tyler looked at his legs, then at the house, then at the key. There was no anger in his expression as he lowered himself from the chair, no hesitation either, just acceptance. Stones cut into his knees as he dragged himself forward, the damp smell of soil and rot filling his lungs. Each movement was agony, but something deeper pushed him onward, a pull stronger than pain. When he reached the door, his arms trembled violently. He fitted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, like it belonged there. Like it had been waiting, the door opened with a low, mournful sound. Darkness swallowed him whole. As his eyes adjusted, a single beam of dying sunlight cut through the gloom, landing on the far wall. Tyler froze, his breath vanished. Hanging there was a massive oil painting. A man stared back at him, not similar, not familiar, identical, the same crooked eyelid, the same jawline, the same eyes that Tyler had seen reflected in shop windows all his life. And beneath the frame, a small plaque gleamed faintly, its words threatening to unravel everything Tyler thought he knew about himself. The moment Tyler read the name beneath the painting, the air left his lungs as if someone had struck him square in the chest. The plaque didn't scream for attention, it didn't need to. The letters were simple, engraved with quiet authority: Jonathan Carver, 1961–1993, beloved father, father. The word echoed through Tyler's skull, bouncing off every memory of cold nights, locked doors, and unanswered questions. Father wasn't a word meant for people like him. It belonged to bedtime stories, scraped knees kissed better, and voices calling you home. Not to alleyways and shelters, yet the man in the portrait had his face. Tyler's hands slid uselessly on the dusty floor as his body sagged. His heart pounded so violently he thought he might pass out right there beneath the man's painted gaze. He searched for differences, anything to prove this was coincidence. A different nose, a different expression, but the longer he stared, the more brutal the truth became. This wasn't resemblance, it was inheritance. The light shifted as the sun dipped lower, illuminating the man's eyes in the painting. They held a sadness so heavy it felt alive, as if the artist had trapped a final regret inside the canvas. Tyler dragged himself farther into the room, dust coating his arms and clothes, pain forgotten entirely. If this man was his father, then everything he'd been told was a lie. His fingers trembled as they touched the cold wood of a nearby armchair. He pulled himself up with effort and collapsed into it, coughing as years of dust filled his lungs. The room around him slowly came into focus: covered furniture, a silent fireplace, tall ceilings stained by time. This place wasn't abandoned, it was preserved. On the mantel above the fireplace, several smaller frames caught the fading light. Tyler knew without understanding how that he needed to see them. Sliding back to the floor, he dragged himself across the room, each movement echoing loudly in the hollow space. The first photograph showed the man from the portrait standing beside a young woman with dark hair and a shy smile. They were close, intimate, happy. The back of the frame read, "Spring 1990, Tyler's throat tightened." The second photo made his vision blur. The same woman sat on a couch, hands resting protectively over a swollen belly. Her smile was forced, her eyes uncertain. Fear and hope tangled together. Then came the third, a hospital room, white sheets, harsh light. The woman lay exhausted but smiling, cradling a newborn wrapped in blue. The man leaned beside her, tears frozen in time. The inscription shook Tyler to his core. Tyler, March 1993, his name, his real name. A sound escaped him, half sob, half breathless laugh, as decades of loneliness cracked open all at once. He hadn't been unwanted. He had been born into love, but love didn't explain the streets. Love didn't explain abandonment. And as Tyler slowly turned back toward the towering portrait, one terrifying question surfaced: if his father loved him, who made the decision to erase him from this life? Tyler sat motionless, the photograph still clutched in his shaking hands as the weight of the truth pressed down on him like a collapsing ceiling. Love had existed. That much was undeniable. The smiles in those frozen moments weren't staged. They were real, and that reality made everything else unbearable. If his parents wanted him, then someone else had decided he didn't belong. His gaze drifted back to the plaque beneath the portrait. 1993. The same year he was born, understanding struck with cruel precision. His father didn't abandon him. His father never got the chance. Tyler lowered the frames back onto the mantelpiece with care, as if the people inside could feel disrespect. His chest burned as questions piled atop one another. What happened after that hospital photo? Why didn't his mother keep him? Why didn't anyone come looking? The room answered with silence. As night settled outside, a faint draft brushed his skin. Cold, recent. Tyler's instincts flared immediately. Years on the streets had trained him to notice things others ignored. He turned his head toward the far corner of the room where a bookshelf stood slightly askew. Behind it, barely visible, was a narrow door. The air seeping from beneath it carried a different scent. Cleaner, less dead. Tyler hesitated. The house had been sealed in dust for decades. No broken windows, no signs of life. And yet someone had been here, recently. Heart hammering, he dragged himself across the floor, every scrape sounding too loud in the quiet mansion. He pushed the door open. It groaned in protest, revealing a small study lit only by moonlight and a single candle flickering on a desk. A figure stood inside. Tyler froze. The woman turned slowly, the candlelight illuminating a face deeply lined by age. Her white hair fell loose around narrow shoulders, and she leaned heavily on a wooden cane. Despite her frailty, her eyes were sharp, alert in a way that made Tyler's skin prickle. "You came," she said softly, as if she'd been expecting him. "After all these years." Tyler's hand groped blindly at the floor until his fingers closed around a cold metal object, an old letter opener. He raised it defensively. "Who are you?" His voice shook despite his effort to steady it. The woman took a cautious step forward. "My name is Margaret," she replied. "I worked in this house most of my life." Her gaze drifted past him to the portrait in the other room. Pain crossed her face like a shadow. "I knew your father," she said, "and your mother." The letter opener slipped from Tyler's hand and clattered against the floor. "You knew her," he whispered. Margaret nodded slowly, lowering herself into a nearby chair with visible effort. I've been waiting 32 years for someone to walk through that door and ask the questions no one else dared to. Tyler's pulse roared in his ears. Every instinct told him to brace himself, because whatever answers Margaret carried had been buried for decades, and they were about to cut deeper than anything he'd discovered so far. Tyler's heart raced as the candlelight trembled between them, throwing shadows across the walls like restless ghosts. If this woman truly knew his parents, then she carried the missing pieces of a life stolen before it began. "Tell me," Tyler said, his voice low but urgent. "Tell me what really happened." Margaret's fingers tightened around the cane. For a long moment she said nothing, as if weighing whether the truth was too heavy to release. Then she sighed, a long, weary sound pulled from the depths of her chest. "Your mother didn't leave you because she didn't love you," she began. "She left because she was terrified." Tyler shook his head slowly. "That's not what I was told." Margaret gave a bitter smile. "Of course not. Lies are easier to live with than shame." She lifted the candle slightly, illuminating her lined face. "After your father died, everything collapsed. He was the only thing holding this house together, and when he was gone, Mrs. Carver changed." The name tightened something in Tyler's gut. "She blamed your mother," Margaret continued. "Not openly, never directly. But in every look, every word, every silence, she saw your mother as the reason her son was on that road, the reason he never came home." Tyler felt heat rise in his chest. "So she pushed her out?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "No. She crushed her." She described whispered threats spoken behind closed doors, accusations that could ruin a grieving young widow with no money and no power, promises that sounded like protection but felt like traps. "Your mother was barely holding herself together, Tyler. She had just lost the man she loved, and then she was told she might lose everything else too, including you." Tyler's breath came shallow. "She gave me up." "No," Margaret said firmly. "She was forced to disappear." The words landed like a blow. "She believed you would be raised here," Margaret said. "Safe, fed, loved, that was the promise made to her. She left believing you'd have the life she couldn't give you." Tyler stared at the candle flame, watching it bend and recover. "But I didn't." Margaret's lips trembled. "No, you didn't." She looked down, shame etched into every wrinkle. "The night she left, you were gone by morning. Mrs. Carver said you'd died. I didn't believe her, not for a second. I searched hospitals, orphanages, churches, but your name never appeared. It was as if you'd been erased." Tyler felt something inside him splinter. "Because I was." Margaret reached out, her bony hand resting gently on his arm. "I failed you, and I've lived with that every day." Silence swallowed the room. Outside, the wind rattled the old windows as if the house itself was listening. Then Tyler spoke, his voice steady but cold. "Where is my mother now?" Margaret hesitated just long enough to make his stomach drop. "She's alive," she said quietly, "but not in the way you're hoping." And in that moment, Tyler realized the truth still wasn't finished with him, it was only sharpening its blade. "She's alive." Those two words struck Tyler harder than any confession before them. For a brief, dangerous second, hope surged through him, bright, reckless, almost unbearable. "Alive," he repeated, his voice cracking. "Then where is she?" Margaret didn't answer immediately. She lowered the candle onto the desk, the flame wavering as if it too feared what was about to be said. Her silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Tyler felt his chest tighten. "She's in a place for people the world gave up on," Margaret said at last. A long-term care institute on the outskirts of the city. Tyler's hands clenched into fists. Why? The word came out raw, stripped of pride. Margaret swallowed. Because grief doesn't always kill the body, sometimes it destroys the mind instead. She told him how his mother tried to survive after being forced away, moving from job to job, sleeping in cheap rooms, writing letters that were never answered. Letters begging for news of her baby, letters that never left this house. Margaret's voice trembled as she spoke of unopened envelopes hidden away, silenced by fear and power. "She waited for you," Margaret said softly. "For years," Tyler's vision blurred, "but she never found me." "No," Margaret replied. And when hope finally ran out, something inside her broke. She explained it gently, but the words still cut deep. The drinking. The nights lost to memory, the slow retreat into a world where pain couldn't reach her. A world where her child was still safe in her arms and her husband still walked through the door at night. "She lives in that moment," Margaret whispered. Every day, Tyler felt his breath hitch. "Does she know who she is?" "Some days," Margaret said. "Some days she doesn't know where she is at all." The room seemed to tilt. Tyler pressed his palm against the floor to steady himself. His mother hadn't abandoned him, she hadn't forgotten him, she'd been trapped. "Where?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would change everything. Margaret met his eyes. "St. Mary's Peace Institute, it's not far." "But Tyler," her voice hardened with concern, "you need to understand something before you go." Tyler looked up. "She may not recognize you," Margaret said. "To her, you're still a baby or maybe just a memory. Seeing you might confuse her, hurt her." Tyler laughed softly, a hollow sound. "I've lived my whole life hurt." Silence followed, heavy, final. Margaret reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded paper, an address. She placed it in his hand with care, as if it might shatter. Tyler stared at it, his heart pounding with equal parts terror and longing. Because somewhere behind locked doors and fading memories, a woman was waiting for a child she believed she'd lost forever, and the question was no longer whether Tyler would go. It was whether seeing him would heal her or break what little of her still remained. The building loomed like a forgotten promise, its pale walls washed dull by time and neglect. St. Mary's Peace Institute stood at the edge of the city, far from busy roads and curious eyes, as if sorrow itself had asked to be hidden. Tyler watched it from the cracked sidewalk, his wheelchair resting beside him like an old companion he no longer needed for this moment. Margaret's warning echoed in his head, but he pushed it aside. Fear had shaped his entire life. He wasn't about to let it decide this one. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Footsteps echoed softly along the hallway as a nurse glanced at him with polite confusion before checking the folded paper in his hand. After a brief pause, she nodded and gestured toward the far end. "She's in the garden," the nurse said gently. "That's where she's calmest." Tyler followed the sound of birdsong through glass doors and into a small courtyard bathed in afternoon light. Flowers bloomed in careful rows, bright and fragile against the grayness beyond the walls. And there, sitting alone on a wooden bench, was a woman with dark hair streaked heavily with silver. His mother. She looked smaller than he imagined, thinner. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers tracing invisible patterns, her eyes fixed on the sky as if waiting for something to fall back down. Tyler froze, his chest tightening so fiercely he thought he might choke. She smiled suddenly. "A beautiful day," she said softly without turning. "He used to love days like this." Tyler swallowed hard. "Who?" he asked. She tilted her head, confused for a moment, then shrugged. "My husband," she replied. "Or maybe my dream." Her smile faded as quickly as it appeared. Tyler stepped closer. "Do you know your name?" She frowned, thinking. "Sometimes," she said, "other times it slips away." Her eyes finally met his and lingered. Something flickered there, recognition or wishful imagining. "You look tired," she added gently, "like someone who's been walking for a very long time." Tyler knelt in front of her, ignoring the ache in his legs. "I've been looking for you," her breath caught. "For me, yes," he whispered, "all my life." Her hand trembled as it lifted, hovering near his face but never touching. "I lost someone once," she said, "a little boy. They told me he was safe." Tears burned Tyler's eyes. He said, "he survived." She searched his face, desperate and afraid. "Are you real?" Tyler nodded. "I am." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And in that fragile silence, Tyler realized the truth wasn't finished revealing itself, because recognition, when it finally comes, can be far more devastating than forgetting. Her fingers finally touched his face. The contact was light, hesitant, as if she feared he might dissolve beneath her hand. Tyler held perfectly still, afraid that even breathing too loudly would shatter the moment. Her palm was warm, real, and that alone nearly undid him. "You feel like him," she whispered, "like the baby I used to hold." Her brows knitted together, confusion clouding her eyes. "But that's impossible. He would be grown now. He would hate me." Tyler's chest tightened. "He doesn't," he said immediately. "He never did." Her hand dropped back into her lap, trembling. "You don't understand," she murmured. "I failed him. A mother shouldn't lose her child. A mother shouldn't forget his face." Tyler shook his head slowly. "You didn't lose him," he said. "You were pushed away." She looked up sharply. "Who told you that?" "Someone who was there," Tyler replied. "Someone who watched it happen." Her breathing quickened. "No," she said, almost to herself. "That house, those walls, I wasn't allowed to ask questions." A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself together, but decades of buried grief finally surfaced. "I screamed for him," she said brokenly. "Every night, even when I couldn't remember why." She clutched at her chest. "There was always an ache here, like something precious was missing." Tyler reached for her hand, and this time he didn't pull away. "That ache was me." Her eyes widened. She studied his face again, slower now, deeper. Her gaze traced the line of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. Something clicked, painfully and beautifully at once. "You have his eyes," she whispered. "Jonathan's eyes." Tyler nodded. "He was my father." Her breath hitched violently. Then her voice shook. "Then yes," Tyler said softly. "I'm your son." The world seemed to pause, the birds quieted, even the wind stilled as if the moment demanded silence. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, her body folding inward under the weight of 32 lost years. Tyler wrapped his arms around her without hesitation, holding her as she cried the tears she'd been denied for decades. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered through sobs. "Even when my mind forgot, my heart remembered." Tyler closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against hers. And in that fragile embrace, he realized something terrifying and true. Finding each other was only the beginning, because love reclaimed after a lifetime of pain must now face the hardest question of all. What comes next? The nurse stood at a respectful distance, watching without interrupting as Tyler slowly released his mother from the embrace. Her breathing steadied, but her hands still clung to his sleeves as if letting go might erase him all over again. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "What if I forget you tomorrow?" The question pierced him deeper than any truth he'd heard inside the mansion. Tyler forced a gentle smile. "Then I'll come back tomorrow," he said, "and the day after that. As many times as it takes." Her eyes filled again, not with confusion this time, but relief. "You'd do that? I've waited my whole life to meet you," he replied. "I'm not disappearing now." The nurse finally stepped forward. "She's had a good day," she said softly. "One of the best in years." Tyler nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Time was fragile here, moments were borrowed, not owned. Before he left, Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out the bronze key. He placed it gently in his mother's palm. "I don't know why," he said, "but this brought me to the truth." She studied the key as if it stirred something distant. "It feels familiar," she murmured, "like a door I was once afraid to open." "You don't have to open it," Tyler said. "Just know I'm on the other side." As he wheeled himself back through the long hallway, something inside him shifted. For the first time, he wasn't running toward answers or away from pain. He was moving forward with purpose. Outside, the sky darkened into deep blues and silver stars. Tyler paused on the steps, inhaling the cool night air. He thought of the mansion, of Margaret, of the woman who had given him life and nearly lost her mind trying to survive without him. And then there was the richest woman in the city, the one who had started all of this with a single confession and a key. She hadn't asked for forgiveness. She had offered truth instead. Tyler tightened his grip on the wheels and began rolling toward the city lights, knowing one final door still remained closed. And whatever waited behind it would decide not only who he was, but what kind of future he would claim for himself and his mother. Some doors don't creak when they open, they slam. Tyler returned to the mansion at Sunflower Lane under a sky heavy with clouds, the city unusually quiet behind him. The bronze key rested in his pocket like a verdict waiting to be read. Everything had led him back here, to the place where his life was decided without his voice, where wealth hid cruelty behind locked rooms and polite smiles. Inside, the house felt smaller now, less powerful, like a lie exposed to daylight. Margaret was waiting in the study, seated beside the desk, her posture stiff with resolve. "She passed this morning," she said before Tyler could speak. Tyler didn't ask who, he already knew. "The city will mourn her generosity," Margaret continued. "They'll praise her donations, her buildings, her name carved into stone." Tyler nodded slowly. "But they won't know the cost." Margaret slid a thick folder across the desk. Inside were documents, letters, signed statements, sealed records. Proof that Tyler had been taken, erased, relocated through influence and money. Proof that his life of suffering wasn't fate, it was a decision. "She left this for you," Margaret said, "along with everything else." Tyler closed the folder, his hands steady. "I don't want revenge." Margaret looked surprised. "I want truth," he continued. "And accountability." Days later, the story broke, not as gossip, not as rumor, as fact. The city reeled as the truth surfaced, how power had been abused, how a child had been discarded to protect a name, how generosity had been built on silence. Foundations froze assets, buildings removed plaques. Apologies came too late to matter. Tyler didn't watch the news. He sat in the garden at St. Mary's beside his mother as she traced the bronze key with a peaceful smile. "I remember you today," she said softly. That was enough. Weeks passed. Tyler found housing, purpose, a voice, not because of money, but because the truth finally gave him ground to stand on. He began telling his story not for sympathy, but for those who thought they were invisible. Because he knew now being erased doesn't mean you were worthless. It means someone was afraid of what you represented. As the sun dipped low, Tyler looked out over the city that once ignored him. And for the first time, it felt small. Because the most powerful thing he owned wasn't wealth, revenge, or inheritance, it was his story. And stories once told never stay buried. Folded hands, thanks for watching this video till the end. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your thoughts below. Your voice matters more than you think. Because some truths change lives and some stories deserve to be heard.